I don't want to convince people who are happily Christians to go through what I went through to deconstruct, because it was horrible. You know, it was lonely, depressing. There were times where I didn't know if I was going to come out of it.
Welcome to Voices of Deconversion. We share the inspirational stories of deconversion told by former Christians who are now atheist or agnostic. Our stories remind us we're in it together. They encourage us as we discover who we are and help us to embrace who we become. Now here's Steve with today's guest.
Welcome back for episode 70. Before we jump into today's interview, I want to put in a quick announcement on behalf of the Feminist Humanist Alliance. Krista Cox, who I interviewed in episode 32, wrote some more details about what they're looking for in board members, and they're still looking for board members to help out with Feminist Humanist Alliance. And I'm just going to go ahead and read what she wrote. The Feminist Humanist Alliance, a project of the American Humanist Association, is recruiting for their national council. They work at the intersection of humanist philosophy and inclusive feminism to build healthy communities that confront discrimination and oppression. For their current projects, they're managing scholarships and grant funds to reduce barriers to access to humanist events and provide support for grassroots organizing. They're working with local humanist groups around the country to increase their social justice footprint. Members of the council attend monthly phone meetings, volunteer their unique skills to advance their agenda, and represent the Alliance at national events in the feminist, atheist, humanist, and skeptic communities. The time commitment is about 2 hours a month. Transgender, non-binary, Black, Indigenous, feminists of color, and people with grassroots activism or leadership experience are encouraged to apply. To learn more or apply, email feministhumanist@americanhumanist.org or visit our website, feministhumanists.org. So we'll go ahead and jump into the intro for today's guest. My guest today grew up in what I would just describe as kind of a typical Christian family, going to church every Sunday, having Bible studies. He says as he grew older, junior high age into high school, that they began to not go to church as much. Some of the themes of the conversation today that I found really interesting, something that's very common for many of us when we were Christians, was balancing that the worldly friends versus the church friends, and having to walk that tightrope, as he puts it. As he gets into college, he switches gears and really gets serious about his faith. He gets into Calvinism for a short time, and so we talk about that a little bit. He's just a friendly guy, and his demeanor's pretty chill as we talk. And I think as you listen to him later in the interview, it becomes clear that it was really devastating to him having to lose his faith. The final thing I just want to mention is that he says something at the end of the interview about not being bitter. I always ask what advice people have for those who are deconverting, and without telling you everything that he talks about, I just felt that it was really great advice. Try not to be bitter. He also clarifies he doesn't want to demean or minimize the experience of people who feel bitter, because many of us do, and for a good reason. And there's a time for that, and maybe there's a piece of that we need to hang on to. But I just felt like, generally speaking, learning how to not be bitter about the things we've gone through with deconversion is excellent advice. I really had a wonderful time speaking with him. Here's my conversation with Jordan. Okay, well, Jordan, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me, Steve. Really appreciate it.
Of course. So, do you consider yourself an atheist, an agnostic, or is there another term that you prefer to use?
Yeah, for me, I think agnostic is probably the right term, but I kind of try to stay away from any labels altogether.
Yeah.
In a weird way, I feel like I'm just as much Christian still as I am agnostic in my own crazy way, but
okay.
Definitely not Christian in the sense of, anyone within a church would probably not consider me Christian. So,
yeah. Well, tell me a little bit about your history and kind of growing up, like how Christianity impacted you, or how you were influenced by Christianity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess one thing I'd like to point out, even before we dive in here,
sure.
I'm really not anti-Christian in the sense that I have some big pedestal to climb on, and I definitely don't resent my background or resent the way I was raised or think that it was some sort of like critical damage to my life in any way. So in a way, I still appreciate it, but I've come to such a different place, and the journey here was definitely not what I would have guessed. And saying that into my background, I would just say that I grew up in a Christian home. Parents married, still married, one older sister. We grew up going to church every Sunday when I was a kid. So definitely all the Bible studies. My parents were pretty involved when we were children. So up until I was probably in about junior high, it was at that point that parents started really it was my dad, started traveling for work. He was out of town, 2 weeks at a time, home 2 weeks at a time, 1 week, doing that sort of thing. And they both stopped going. So therefore I stopped going pretty much in junior high, which was great because I had my Sundays back to watching all the sports I loved as a kid. So
that's good. Nice.
So, but definitely, strong Christian background growing up. It was, even as like a junior higher, I can remember feeling convicted about not going to church anymore. And it wasn't like I wasn't allowed to, but if my parents weren't going, I didn't really force myself to go. I think I may have gone to some college groups, and I was a pretty shy kid growing up in junior high. So for whatever reason, I never made that many friends at church, but I had a lot of friends, in the neighborhood and that I would see regularly at school and whatnot. So I didn't really miss church all that much. I just remember feeling like I don't, want to go to hell or become a bad person because I'm not going to church.
Kind of the basic things that people want to avoid,
Exactly. Some of that deep-rooted stuff that, I already came to believe as a kid. So it was around high school, maybe like sophomore year when, of course, there was a cute girl who sat across from me who went to a youth group and invited me, to go to her youth group. And
you can't say no to that.
Yeah, no. Yeah. And then that was the first time I think I had gone to church and experienced like a group of people. I knew some of them there, but we played basketball before it started. I was a basketball junkie. So I just remember feeling kind of at home at that church right away. I remember really liking the high school pastor, who he's a great guy. And I, for the first time, had more of a community and more friends involved at church. And, it felt good to be doing the right thing again, I suppose. So maybe I didn't go every Sunday, but I still went like Thursday nights and had a great time. And we dug into the Word. And for the most part, I really enjoyed it. But it was also at that time that I had got a job. My first job, I was 16 when I started working as a busboy, and started, developing older friends as well who were like 18, 19. And, I had my own car. I was old for my grade. So there's a certain sense of independence that I achieved probably before most of my friends and most people my age, which we all took advantage of. And so, with that, I found myself having more friends and more ways to go hang out with people. And within work, a lot of the older crowd that, I would have liked to hang out with, that I was kind of trying to fit in with still, I got introduced to, parties and alcohol and all sorts of debauchery. Not really. That was mostly it. Just,
just high school parties. Yeah.
High school parties. I started playing poker, and I remember there were like these parts of my life that just weren't acceptable in the church. And so I started to develop this friends that were in the church, friends who were outside the church. And I remember feeling really torn between the two because, the worldly friends, as I'll just call them right now, simply, they were more fun to hang out with in a certain way. There was more excitement there. Anytime there's, you're going out and just kind of cutting loose, and it's not like we were doing anything too wild, but even just like playing beer pong or something like that was, that was a lot of fun, in high school. And I suppose I started feeling like I was living this double life. And on the one hand, you had the worldly friends who really didn't care if you went to church or not, right?
Right.
As long as you hung out with them and were friendly and you had a good time together, that's all they really cared about. And then on the other hand, there was a lot of friends within the church who I still like those friendships for obvious reasons as well. I suppose I'm just turned in from being an introvert. I ended up turning into quite the extrovert and having the different crews of friends. I was a roamer. I didn't hang out with any one group. It was multiple, I guess is what I'm getting at.
So did you feel a tension between trying to maintain the friendships with the church versus the friendships, the high school friends that were the worldly friends? Was there a tension where it was like, if I hang out with one group of friends, then is the other group of friends going to not approve of that, or not like that,
Right. Definitely within the church group of friends, it was a pretty like strict Bible college, and drinking was not even really acceptable for adults, to be doing socially. So I think that for sure from the church friend side, I mean, it was, I felt a lot of judgment, which, I was earning, to their credit based on what we were supposed to be living and believing.
Right.
However, I had this part of me that just couldn't stop. It had nothing to do with the drinking. Like, I just couldn't forsake one group of friends for another.
Yeah.
And there's only one side of them that was really, because that other group of friends, I was still going to see at work. I was still going to see at school. I was still going to play sports with them.
Yeah.
Some of them are guys I've known since I was in elementary school. So I think the real tension internally wasn't so much upsetting one group of friends versus the others. It was, how do I witness to this group of friends and bring them into a Christian mindset? And how can I be a light to those friends? And I just knew the answer wasn't totally forsaking them altogether and just telling them like, hey, look, guys, I'm not going to do this. There were definitely seasons where I tried to tell them like, hey guys, like I'm down to hang out, but I'm not going to drink. But that only lasted so long. So all through high school, I really wrestled with that. And then once I graduated high school, there was a couple of buddies of mine who were kind of 1 foot in, 1 foot out, still went to that church, but we hung out with the other group of friends as well.
So kind of a similar situation to yourself.
Yeah. And so me and a couple of those guys got really close just because I think there was a mutual understanding that we were walking this tightrope that we weren't all necessarily comfortable with, but we also didn't really know how to handle either.
Yeah.
So, and one of those friends and I, we had moved out together a couple weeks after we graduated. We both had jobs, since we were 16, and now we're 18, and we had some money saved up and a little different maturity gap, I guess, in the independence department, or so we thought, at least at the time. And so we got an apartment, had another buddy move in, and it was at that point where we became like the place to hang out and be. And I remember that's when I felt like, okay, I either got to start my adult life, am I going to be a Christian, or am I going to keep going down this path? What am I going to do? And I remember becoming really, really broken over it, and just deciding like, the worldly lifestyle is just not worthwhile. And what's funny is we really weren't doing anything that bad in
that
the
is
grand
really
scheme
funny.
of things. It just felt so horrible. None of us were like sleeping around. None of us, I'm still a virgin. I didn't sleep with anyone. It was literally just whether or not you can have a good time with buddies playing video games and drinking alcohol or not. And I remember feeling just so much weight from that. And, and eventually it came to a point where I was like, okay, there were so many parties at our house all the time, and it was kind of going to another level, and I just wasn't comfortable with it. And I was basically like, hey, look, I'm going to pursue Christ. That's going to be, my priority in life. He's going to be preeminent in all things. And I can no longer like justify hanging out and drinking with you guys on the weekend and showing up to church. And
so even though you were kind of straddling both worlds, or you had kind of a foot in both in both worlds and both friend groups, did you feel like even though you were kind of friends with both sides, that you were still a strong Christian internally, like for yourself, like you felt like you had a strong faith despite kind of this battle you were having?
That's a really good question. I do think I had a strong faith, but I also think I was very self-aware to know I was figuring things out. I never, ever felt like at any point in time I'd stopped growing within my faith, but I also never held myself on any sort of Christian pedestal. I was like, if the point is to bring people to Christ, and if the point is to have, a relationship with Christ, a lot of the external stuff that people would see in church, I just kind of scoffed at. And partly that was probably due to some of the choices I was making. It was just easier for me to see, like, hey guys, we shouldn't be like bitter that somebody's going to church and then struggling, throughout the week, but trying to, win other people to Christ. And maybe they're not doing that perfect, but at least they're out there. At least I was out there trying to make a difference. And I really believed I was at the time.
Yeah.
And I wasn't just in this Christian shell and bubble of where I'm, studying the Bible and have great things to say at church and can get moved during worship. And my prayer, like I prayed every day. I was always asking for wisdom. I just never, ever felt like I had it figured out. So there was kind of a humble side, I think, to my faith that I wished I could share with other people within the church. But but I didn't feel like they were getting it. And obviously they didn't feel like I was getting it.
Interesting. So you felt like some of the people in the church weren't necessarily living out their faith in the best way?
Right. I just didn't understand what the point of being a Christian was if all you did was hang out with your Christian friends and do your Christian things and study your Bible. I just didn't understand what the point was.
That's a good thought. I mean, if they're kind of secluded like that, then they're not really evangelizing, which is, for many Christian denominations, is a big deal.
Yeah, we had a huge, evangelical system we had put in place at our church, but it was so cheesy and so salesy, and I don't know. I didn't feel like that was right. I felt like there were a lot of legalistic things going on that everyone else was blind to, that was kind of worthless, if it didn't transfer over to the rest of the world. So I felt strong in my faith, but I guess I had a more offensive mindset. I can remember having conversations about this where I was like, look, Christ paid for your sins. You should not be so concerned about going out and making mistakes. Like if you are just going to sit in your room and not sin, what good is that? It's just as sinful to not be thinking of others. What's the spirit of it all? What's the heart of it all? And I didn't feel like that was, I felt like while I was on one end of the spectrum that had some unhealth, there was a lot going on the other end of the spectrum that was probably equally unhealthy, that people just were, at least I was feeling convicted, and I knew when I was not acting appropriately or being a good witness. Whereas I felt like some people were just totally, they just grew up in the church and they had this rhythm of how they did things, and it was not ultimately to the benefit of others. It was ultimately to the benefit of their own conscience and feeling good about themselves. And I didn't get that part of it.
That's really interesting. It kind of contrasts with some types of Christians where they have this internal angst and they're always struggling to not sin, and they're focused on the self and pleasing Christ by, their actions in terms of not sinning. But
right.
It seems like, in contrast to that, you were kind of saying, I'm not going to really worry about all that too much. I'm just going to try to focus on on saving people for Christ. Not that you didn't think about yourself or about how to be a good person, but like it's interesting to me because I haven't heard a whole lot of people say like kind of how you said it, that your focus was really on trying to reach people for Christ, and that should have been the focus of the church. And I think that's a good point.
Well, definitely. And the hard part was I was always looking for moments with my friends where I could have that spiritual conversation with them. It was actively on top of my mind. But if those moments came when we were 3 beers deep playing Tiger Woods golf or something, I just felt like that was a redeemable situation that was going on there.
That's kind of cool. Yeah, that's a good, as a Christian, I think that's a good way to think about it, you know? If I were that guy, I'd be like, I'm 3 beers deep, it's over. Like, I was like black and white, you know?
Right. That's how it felt from my Christian background. And
yes, but you didn't feel that way.
No, I just felt like if I'm going to err on that side, at least, I mean, there were several great conversations that came about with that group of friends. It was just a matter of, it just felt so tricky, you know, but once again, I would rather be on that end of the spectrum, you know, for me than on the opposite end of the spectrum where, great, like I've memorized, you know, a chapter of the Bible. Okay. You know, now what? You know, it's a weird culture that I think American Christianity has, and I understand it and I get it. And you want to honor your parents, you want to honor your family, you want things to be as uncomplicated as possible. I was just looking at, I just didn't have as much pressure coming from, I think, all the other angles people have them coming from, being someone who didn't go to the same church as his family and didn't have parents who went to church and had one sister that wasn't going to see me. You know, I was very much kind of living on my own with my own responsibilities, making my own rules that I thought made sense, you know, at the time. And also, but it was a struggle. It wasn't as if I didn't have moments or seasons where I was like, I just can't hang out with these guys anymore.
Okay. Yeah. So you're still having that internal kind of typical evangelical Christian struggle where it's like, I don't want to, you know, be influenced negatively by this group of friends, and I don't want to live that lifestyle if it goes too extreme.
Sure. Yeah. Anytime, you know, it turned into a situation where I got super drunk or made bad decisions, and, you know, it was, of course, like I felt I would always have like a knee jerk reaction and be like, I can't do this anymore. You know, but I felt like I was battling where everyone else was, not everyone else, but where a lot of people who were I respected, but also had a hard time getting along with, were sitting on the sidelines. And so it was hard for me to communicate that to them at the time, especially because I didn't really even fully understand what internal struggles were going on for me. I just knew they were there.
But these other Christians you felt judged by?
Right. I did, but, you know, at the same time I understood, you know, what was going on. So it's tricky because I don't, when people say like, oh, I don't go to church because I feel judged. Well, it's like, yeah, well, if you're doing stuff you shouldn't be, then I guess I felt misunderstood more than I felt judged, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does. That's a good distinction to make, I think.
Yeah. So, you know, from there, I became super spiritual. I kind of had like a total breakdown.
And this is early college years?
First year of college.
Okay.
You know, I was really struggling with school and with work, and, you know, I was blaming, you know, what was going on in my living circumstances for that. And finally at one point I realized I shouldn't be blaming everything else. This is totally my fault. Like, this is 100% stuff I can control that I'm just not, you know, in hindsight, looking back, I wasn't mature enough to control.
Yeah.
And that really, really broke me to a point of where I moved out and really switched gears and really, really started studying the Bible for the first time, really got involved with the young adult group, realized I could still see these friends, but kind of on my terms, and not be in situations where things would get out of hand. And so I became more or less a super Christian. I felt like I had my real conversion at that point, right around then. And there was a lot of stuff had happened where I was in a car accident and, had to have surgery and had all this time on my hands, started reading C.S. Lewis books, fell in love with those, fell in love with the way he approached the Bible and communicating. He had all these answers for questions about Christianity that I always asked, but never really out in the open, and made a lot of things make sense that, didn't within the religion. I mean, I always struggled with, well, I just believe this because I grew up this way.
Yeah.
And so as I dove into more Christian reading and my Bible, started studying it, started really getting into, systematic theology. The college group at the time had really switched gears to a more Calvinistic viewpoint. I remember being blown away by that and thinking, oh my, I've been reading this all wrong and understanding this all wrong. But really struggled with the idea that, for those who aren't aware, I'll just dive into it. But as far as the idea that God could choose a group of people before time to go to heaven and others to go to hell, I mean, that was, in one way, it was like, I felt enlightened because I could believe it and I could make it make sense. And I think that's the ugly temptation of being in a church and being stuck in your Bible, is you dig deeper and deeper in this theology that kind of gets away from the point. But at the time, I remember feeling enlightened and feeling a strong sense of, I am a Christian because I can understand this and I can handle the hard truths that come with being a Christian. And, things aren't so much up to my control. They're really just in God's control.
Did you feel a sense of relief in that you probably didn't need to evangelize as much anymore because he chose who he chose?
It's so funny because I think any Calvinistic teaching is going to say, because of this, we should go out and spread the word to everyone who's elected. But that's just not human nature. This is me talking as a 30, almost 34-year-old.
Yeah.
Like, now I understand a lot about how we're wired, That's just not human nature,
Wait, I don't have to get up and go do all this work? Okay.
It's just, and even though we still would witness and evangelize, it was different. There was a lot of relief because there wasn't as much riding on your shoulders as it felt like. But even more so, there was a huge sense of pride in that you could understand or try to understand something that just doesn't make sense when it comes down to it, and it was, I guess, the fast forward a little bit, I started wrestling with it because I kind of realized that, what's the difference, and this might come out wrong, but bear with me.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah. You just work it out.
Sure. How do we know the difference between good and bad, or even God and Satan, if we don't have some sort of intrinsic way to know what is good or bad? If it's just a matter of programming, this whole thing is kind of pointless. There's no point. There's nothing different from us and a rock. And then that's where it turned into, oh no, we still make choices. We just don't choose. It's just not up to us as to whether we're saved or not. But then it's like, okay, well, what's the point in those choices? If the point is to eventually have a relationship with the Lord and be with him for eternity.
Right.
It's all like, the whole part of being human is being completely stripped away, which some would say is better because God is higher and man is lower. But I guess for me, eventually it came to a point of, now even the whole concept of faith, what is faith really? Because, within a Calvinistic model, faith is given to you. It's not really something, we do on our own.
Yeah, that's interesting, because that was very different from how I understood it. So that's interesting to hear you talk about it.
Well, and very different from, I think, most of the way American Christianity is, which is where the pride comes in, because you would within, that teaching, that little bubble, it was like, we understand that man is low and God is high. Like God is lifted higher because of what we believe. And people who think they can save themselves, I mean, some of us would even question as to if they're really saved or not, because they're having a total misunderstanding of who God is and who man is.
Yeah.
And it's weird because you have like Calvinism, which makes no sense. Then you have hyper-Calvinism, which makes a lot more sense. Basically, you're subscribed and on board with the fact that, it's basically all God and nothing to do with you. But the funny thing about, your typical Calvinist is, and me, at times, is you can't, it's like, if God extended his hand, you don't do the work to reach out and grab it. It would be that you are running fast and hard towards hell, and God snatches you away from that path, and you're just his from that point on.
Yeah.
So what was funny is I started realizing exactly, to circle back, just how pointless that belief system was, and that there wasn't really anything prideful about it. There's a difference between mysteries and not understanding something and trying to work it out, and then things that just completely conflict one another. So the idea that faith could exist, but God would just snatch you out it's
kind of contradictory.
It basically removes most of what the Bible is telling us to do and says it's not up to us. But we have a book communicating to us that it is up to us. Like or some of it's up to us in some way. And so I can remember getting deep into hermeneutics. Like at this point, I really wanted to go to seminary too. And I was deep into hermeneutics. And I can remember when I knew things were starting to really turn on their head for me, faith-wise, was I was talking with the pastor, and there's a passage in Hebrews that essentially says that, someone can lose their faith. I'm summarizing here.
Yeah.
And there's a Greek word that's used in that passage that, he drew into question, which was, okay, well, we know that's not what this word actually means in Greek, because, the rest of the Bible doesn't teach that someone can lose their faith. I'm like, okay, so let's find where else that word is used. And so we did. It's only used one other time. And it's literally like something like as simple as he lost his cloak, or, it was something like very really obviously like lost.
Gotcha.
Lost something.
Okay.
Right. That word, the one other instance we find it, is very clearly used to say lost, and so I was like, no. So there's no way this passage could possibly be saying what you're implying it's saying. And it turned into kind of a heated discussion. And basically he was like, no, now we must know that this word has two meanings. And I'm just like...
So he's essentially reading into it what he wants it to mean.
And I always suspected that might have been what was going on with me and what was going on with everyone who had a certain lens for how they were studying the Bible at this point. But it became so abhorrently clear that was what was going on in this instance that I kind of just shut down. I was like, oh my God, like, I put a lot of faith in this teaching, and I'm sincerely trying to work this out. I'm not trying to be a problem, to your teaching. I'm really like, and then there was, in Romans 9, that's a big, section that's used to talk about elections or election. Some vessels made for destruction, some not. I'm totally butchering these just for the sake of being simple,
like,
for those who aren't aware of it. Yeah, no worries. But I went through Romans verse by verse, and tried to follow Paul thought for thought, and just tried to ask myself, if I didn't already believe in election, what would I actually read through this, and what would his point probably in all this?
Yeah. That's cool.
And I just came to the conclusion, it was so clear to me, and I didn't want it to be, but it still became so clear to me that what he was talking about had nothing to do with individual salvation and election, and everything to do with Israel and them being a chosen nation to bring God's word, and just them being the chosen people.
Yeah.
And I was so blown away that this could be so badly butchered. And, through this whole time, I'm being prayerful, like, please don't let me be a problem. I'm really trying to work this out. I did a huge outline, line by line, sent it to some people within the church, and including, that pastor, and just got no response. I'm like, guys, like, I am trying to work this out. Somebody help me understand what I'm missing here. And the answer just was basically like, you're just kind of off the rails. You're missing the whole point of the rest of the Bible. I was like, no, the more I dig into this and look at, Ephesians 2 is the other one. And, I won't dive into that one, but it was just, I realized I was at the wrong church, and I was learning the wrong things, and kind of switched gears to another church. I was still friends with everyone there. Like, once again, like, I've never been, there was some bitterness between me and that, pastor who was there, at least on my end, because, my parents had started going to church at that time too. So I had kind of multiple reasons for going to the church they went to, because I cared about them and their faith, and being at the same church as them now that they had kind of started renewing their faith again. And his reply to me going there, and he was basically like a second father to me, and was, now that you're choosing to go to that church, I don't think, it's appropriate for us to meet anymore.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And, well,
why would that matter? Yeah.
His reasoning behind it was simply that I should be giving the pastors the opportunity to mentor me there, that he's enjoyed so much while I was with him. So he kind of put like a nice little spin on it, but it was more or less, and it wasn't like, hey, I don't ever want to talk to you again or see you again. But it was very much like, no, like, go be a part of your new church family, which always boggled my mind too, because it doesn't really matter what corner you're worshiping at. You're all still the same, same Christian family.
I suspect he just didn't want to have the questions.
Yeah. And I think I raised the point to him too. I was like, you've been meeting with the same guy for, 20 something years, 30 something years. How would you feel, if he had just up and said after 5 years, sorry, you're going to a different place to worship, so it's not right for me to disciple you anymore.
Yeah.
And so that was that. I don't think I've ever fully gotten over. I wish I had, but that was.
Well, it's hurtful.
Felt pretty misunderstood once again. Not judged, not betrayed necessarily, but just misunderstood. And that was tough. So but I did, get involved at this other church. At this point, I had started a small marketing business just so I could spend more time at the church and doing an internship at the church. And because I eventually wanted to be in ministry full time. And essentially, I was living pretty poor, but I was, had started a business that was good enough to pay my bills, pay my rent, could still do some fun things. And that was exciting anyways. I mean, I'd always had kind of a more entrepreneurial spirit, and I was working with two of my close friends when it started, and we had a great time, and, enough success for me out of the gate where I was like, this is going to work. Like, I can do this, and we can make this work until I switch over to some sort of full-time ministry. So, I started taking Bible classes at 6 a.m. there. They had a really cool program that dug deep into the Bible. Once again, the Calvinist thing came up in that. And I was like, oh no. I was like, shoot, half the room's crying as this pastor's going over this for the first time. And I'm like,
oh no.
At that point I was like, this is just not a topic that needs to really even be discussed, because it's so easy to misunderstand and so easy for people to go down the wrong path on it. And it's really not the point.
People were crying because it upset them.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the thought of God chose your mom to go to heaven and your dad to go to hell. I mean,
right.
It's unavoidable.
Yeah,
and it's a correct thought to have, where that sort of way of studying scripture would say it's not correct. It really is. I mean, there's just no way you can make a distinction. And if you think that because you're able to get over the fact that it conflicts so much and that somehow makes your faith stronger and solidifies that you're right, is a really sick, twisted way of, making that work in your own head.
Right.
It's not that it's mysterious. You can't have one without the other. It's nonsense. Anyway, sorry, I'm getting on it.
No, it's okay. It was a big part of your life. It was a big part of kind of your faith. So
yeah, definitely for a few years there. I kind of backed completely off that position once I had started working at this church and kind of had come up with my own way of looking at things and still being able to, be happy within that church and most of its teachings. And to be fair, it was really only the Bible class that they went hard at that point, but within the actual larger like services and the pastor, he was way more fair and way less, in your face about like, this is the core of Christianity, because he and the church in general they were not a Calvinist church. It was not a situation where they felt like if you didn't believe that, there was something wrong with you. Or like if you didn't believe that,
so you're not
reading scripture right.
Yeah.
Right. And I think most churches obviously are more along the lines of this new one I had started attending. And I thought they were very fair about it. They would address, Calvinism, but they weren't ramming it down your throat in any way, shape, or form. So I was totally cool with that. I was like, because it could be right. I just can't. I'm just not getting there. Maybe someday I will again. But I was like,
I'm just not there at that time. Yeah.
Sorry, I can't take nonsense and say that it's some higher mystery I don't understand.
Yeah, at some point your brain's like, this is baloney.
Yeah, this
doesn't make sense anymore.
It's being reckless with the gifts God has given you to just say, essentially, well, this doesn't make sense at all, and it's okay for me to still believe it.
Mm-hmm.
For me, that just didn't work.
Yeah.
So this church, I had started interning there, so 20 hours a week. I was a campus pastor intern, so I was spending time doing more behind-the-scenes stuff with one of the pastors. This church had multiple locations, so one of the pastors at one of the locations, I was kind of his shadow.
Okay.
And that was really awesome. Like I got to sit in on marriage counseling. I got to, go to Bible class every morning. And the one hang up with that is they expected you to pay for a trip to Israel, which was a large sum of money at the time.
Wow.
And unfortunately, I got kicked out of the program halfway through. Well, just the Bible study portion, because I was not comfortable sending out letters to raise money for what I saw was essentially a vacation.
Wow.
And I always struggle with that too when people were doing short-term missions and asking for money. That always rubbed me the wrong way. I was like, well, if this is something that's really important to you, like schedule ahead of time, make the money, figure out a way to earn the money yourself and pay for it. That seems like it would be a lot more worthwhile to your soul than just sending out letters to 200 people in the church and, friends, families, neighbors, everyone, and just saying like, hey, can everyone chip in a few bucks?
Right. No, I totally agree with you on that. That always made me very uncomfortable, that type of thing.
Yeah. That being said, I still gave to, people who,
yeah. But well, whatever. We probably all have. Yeah.
Yeah. For me personally, it was just not something I was willing to do as like a 25 or 26-year-old at the time.
Right.
And, I explained it like very kindly. I was like, hey, if I can earn the money and come up with it and pay for it by that time and I can make that work, I'm all for it, but I can't commit to it, 6 months ahead of time.
Yeah.
And so unfortunately I got to still do the intern program. I got to still help launch a new campus, which was cool. I mean, I was part of the inner circle of doing that and meeting once a week and spending a lot of time, getting that off the ground. And I gained a lot from that time. And it was shortly after that point that it kind of became clear. I was going to go do some more ministry at a church camp for the summer. I ran a young adults program. At this point, I was 26, 27. And I was like, man, if I'm ever going to have enough money to like raise a family, or if I'm ever going to, this is not the path I can keep going down. There weren't really any real ministry opportunities that were available to me full time, not being someone who had a Bible degree and not someone being able to afford seminary,
Yeah.
So I felt like I had really given as much as I could, like throughout my 20s. And once again, not bitter, not resentful, but I was like, man, I got to do something. I can't just keep doing these dinky, ministry jobs and be able to get married someday or have kids someday.
So you were putting the pieces together and like kind of crunching the numbers in your head and deciding for yourself, financially, I'm not going to be able to make ends meet. I'm not going to be able to support myself and a family if I continue on the ministry path. Is kind of what you're saying?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so not that I was dating anyone seriously at the time, but I was I was already there. I was like, what if I was like, what would I do? Yeah. So what I was doing was great for me and me getting by and being happy. But, I start feeling the pressures of society, family, everyone else. I'm 4 years into, having this business at the time. And it became pretty clear that we'd kind of hit a ceiling with where we started and where I could try to grow it. I just wasn't capable, and I knew that.
Okay.
And so I took what I considered to be my last kind of ministry job that summer, had a great summer, and came back and was like, all right, I got to enter the workforce again somewhere. And it was at that point I had a close friend who had been like on me for a year and a half to go join him in the car business and, selling cars. I was just like, I'll never do a sales job again. I skipped over a sales job I had done throughout the story when I was younger, like 21, 22. Mm-hmm. Had a lot of success, but it was the worst thing. I mean, it was terrible what came out of it. And it was fairly short-lived. But that same friend who I'd had success with there was now in car sales, and he assured me it's not the same thing. You can have integrity. In fact, if you have integrity, you'll do better. He's like, it's such a, shady business that I just know you and someone like you, people are going to know you're sincere. You'll be great. Yeah. Just come try it. And he persuaded me with some of his paychecks, of course, as well. And there you go. And I was like, okay. I was like, I'm going to go try this for 3 months. If it doesn't work, I'll think of something else. Yeah. And within three months, I'd actually really fallen in love with the car sales business. It was a ton of work. I went from having lax my own business to, 50, 60-hour work weeks. But it was, there's a certain sense of like getting the hang of it and doing well with it and getting recognition there. And there were other opportunities ahead of that where I got kind of switched gears to this work mode. And with that, I had to work Sundays. So I kind of stopped, going to church on Sundays. And I just kind of started drifting a little bit. And as I drifted, I started thinking, more seriously about a lot of the issues that I'd had while I was a part of it. And
part of the church,
right. I was really trying to reconcile still within my own faith some of the questions and some of the difficulties I was having, with it. Mm-hmm. I started dating someone while I kind of moved into this space, and that went on in that relationship. It's not that it wasn't unhealthy or anything, but I just got so freaked out and scared that I was going to have to communicate to this, girl who I thought was great and her family, like, guys, I'm going down a path of where I'm not sure if I'm going to be a Christian, the rest of my life.
So these questions and doubts you were having were pretty significant.
They'd always kind of been there.
Mm-hmm.
And just and it's not like I'd stopped studying the Bible or I'd stopped anything altogether. Mm-hmm. The only thing that was different is I was drifting away from that community more regularly.
And that's because of your job?
Yeah.
You were just so busy?
Well, yeah. I mean, my life was totally different once I kind of moved into a career mode where there just wasn't, But even within that job, it was kind of the same thing. I was still the Christian guy. People knew that was important to me. People would talk to me about it. I'd witness to people there. I'd do my best to have the utmost integrity, and to have success with it just felt like I was in the right place.
Mm-hmm.
Once again, I was not just in this Christian bubble anymore, but I was back out, rubbing shoulders with people who weren't Christian more regularly than people who were.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not even as if it was all at once. It's just something started breaking down while I had started, dating this girl, where it became more, I think because I took relationships so seriously, the fact that I'd started dating someone and didn't feel like I was heading in a direction to lead that relationship really intensified my thoughts and really cranked up the volume on some of the doubts I'd always had. And I just broke it off, didn't say anything, no explanation.
No.
Yeah, really, I didn't know how to, at the time.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. I mean, life, these decisions sometimes we don't know how to handle them. I mean, yeah.
Right. And I didn't know that we would never circle back to have a conversation about it. So to be fair, I knew anything I tried to explain at that time would make no sense, because it didn't make sense to me at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I just knew it was something I needed to do, and that I'd rather cut things off when I did than drag something out that turns into just a bigger mess later. And so that's what I did. And then until I was able to figure out my own thoughts, I was like, I'm not going to go back into that space of dating someone.
So before you go on anymore, I actually kind of want to dig into that a little bit. So you broke it off because when you were in a relationship, the thought occurred to you, as a Christian man, I should be like the spiritual leader.
Well, for sure. Like, I felt that way, and
Okay.
I don't feel like I was totally not fulfilling that. It was just, I knew something was changing in me, and there were things I needed to get figured out that I couldn't do with somebody else on board.
No, that makes a lot of sense. So I'm imagining you having this thought of, I need to be, if I'm a spiritual leader in a relationship, like, I should have these things sorted out, and they're just not sorted out right now. I'm not ready for this. And so that's when you put the stop to it. Like, okay, let's just call it off. Because you just knew you weren't in the place where you could take on that role that you expected yourself to take on.
And as poorly as I just didn't communicate whatsoever and thought that was a good idea, it was still a much better idea than, I think, trying to sort through it or go about it a different way.
Yeah, because you would have been forcing it.
Right. Yeah, it just wasn't going to happen. I just, if I can't figure it out, I'm sure as, hell not going to be able to explain it to someone else or her family or the people around me. So it was kind of at that point where I had shut down altogether. I had, for most of my life, I had lived with at least like 4 other Christian roommates, through my 20s. At this point, I was just living with one other really close friend, a Christian roommate. And I'm sure he got the sense that something was off. But to his credit, I think he also knew that I would eventually work it out one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
I was a little older than him too, so I definitely don't think he felt intimidated, but I do think there's a sense that he just didn't feel like it was his place maybe to challenge me. Yeah. And that was actually something really, really awesome at the time. I don't know how I would have handled it if he was the type of guy who was coming at me with all sorts of stuff. He was always just more or less inviting, but not intrusive. And, we kind of talked about anything, but we kind of steered clear of what was going on in my heart, I guess, as a Christian.
And that sounds like it was a good thing, actually, because it gave you space to work it out. Right.
Maybe Christian friends would think it's a bad thing as the way the story is going to turn out, but I definitely appreciated it and still appreciate him, and I'm close with him.
That's cool.
And he's an awesome friend. And I do feel like we could have talked about anything had I brought it up, but it just wasn't going to happen. during that time. So at that point, the problem is I had realized because I essentially realized I wasn't a Christian. It wasn't that I was mad or bitter or one thing like triggered me. I just came to the realization that I wasn't a Christian in the sense of what I had grown up in and what I had experienced as, throughout most of my 20s. And the whole concept of faith just broke down internally to the point where it didn't mean anything to me anymore. And I could kind of go into more detail on that, I suppose. But at the same time, the tricky thing for me is, and the reason why I've never really talked to any close friends, and this is kind of the first time I'm even going through this, is I don't want to convince people who are happily Christians to go through what I went through to deconstruct.
Sure.
Because it was horrible. It was lonely, depressing. There were times where I didn't know if I was going to come out of it. Not to be overly dramatic, but
no.
I mean, really, it was like when you've lived a chunk of your adult life and a lot of your childhood is surrounded by it. What happens when there is no more hope of heaven? What happens when the purpose of your life is no longer there? How do you work through that? What becomes the moral framework? What is worthwhile? What's the point? Even. So I went through that season probably over the course of a year or two, working in the car business, where, I remember it got to the point where I was just so depressed that I was like, I'm just going to start doing drugs. At least I'll feel good for a little bit, and it was just weird because I didn't, for the first time in my life, I didn't really want to hang out with people. I just focused on work. That's all. That was like my purpose, was work and golf. I would wake up at like 5:30 in the morning, go golf and go to work for 10 hours, come home, play video games and go to bed, or, something childish, just something to busy my mind.
Yeah.
And then when I, a lot of times, being on the golf course, by yourself early in the morning, that's where I would really be thinking about stuff too. And, there's just 2 years where that's all it really was. I didn't really see many people, didn't really see much of my family, didn't really know if I was going to come out of it or what was going to happen. And
it sounds like it was a lonely time for you.
It was lonely, and then it shifted into this weird sort of excitement of, oh my God, I didn't need all that structure to find purpose for my life. I was able to unwind all the stuff that was wrong in my own heart or soul or whatever, my own subconscious versus conscious. I was able to unwind everything to a large degree and then be able to look at it from a healthy viewpoint, a different person who was more intentional with his time, who was able to reprioritize what is and isn't important, and not be so concerned with how am I viewed as a Christian and how many souls can I save and how can I just be a good human being to other people? How do I respect everyone? How do I love everyone correctly? How do I better myself? If I only get one shot at life, what do I want it to look like? It's not like it as if it's meaningless now. Like, it's because in a weird way, as a Christian, you always have this idea that, oh, this sucks, but one day I'll be in heaven. Instead of, oh, this sucks, maybe I should fix it. Or, oh, this sucks, maybe I can improve myself. Or, oh, this sucks, like, I guess this is just what God wants for me right now. This is the struggles God's putting on my plate. So therefore I'm just going to pray through it. And all the time once I started hanging out with more friends and feeling like I was in a healthier place to be a good friend to people and be a better person. It was just weird, like how much more I cared about that time and how much more I cared about the right parts of my job and just how much more I cared about improving myself.
In other words, it mattered more, which was maybe counterintuitive to the Christian you.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it became true.
That's the weird, because I don't feel like I'm living under a bunch of stuff that I don't understand. I feel like I fully understand what's going on. And this isn't to be like, I understand myself much better. And that allows me to be a more productive, healthier, happier person who has more to give to people. That's not just the Bible or not just a Christ-driven message, just not a parrot who's, saying the right things that they've been told, but actually being able to give advice that has more substance to it, I think, at least. And so it's hard though, because I don't know of friends and family and people who are still involved at church. I feel like a lot of times when I listen to people who have deconstructed, like I almost feel a little sad for them, because it's more or less, there's so much bitterment and resentment, and they feel like they just have this other message to preach. That's almost along the same, pot that's just stirred differently.
So like they're an evangelist for atheism, or they're
right, yeah,
they're preachy about their non-belief, that type
correct,
of thing.
Or they're just out to put down other people.
Yeah,
they're just out to like put down other people and say, boy, you all have it wrong and now I have it right. It's not that I have anything right per se. It's just that I understand where I'm coming from at all times. And in a way, I think that makes what I can give, more valuable, because it's not coming from a place of insecurity within a faith or just, once again, just, repeating something that you've heard over and over again.
Yeah.
There's not, like, I've come to realize, like, my conscience is my conscience, and it's important in the way I don't like habits I'm in or things I'm doing. Like I can make those changes, and it doesn't have to be this big spiritual warfare. Like it doesn't have to be this big, terrible trial and temptation that I just can't get over. And it's just a different space altogether.
Yeah. Tell me if this is true, but for you, it sounds like Christianity was muddying the waters in a sense. And what I mean is, like, with as far as your clarity goes. So now that Christianity is not a part of your life in the same way, you can think clearly. You can see things as they are, not like
through a filter or through
right,
a lens.
or through or obfuscated by some kind of like foggy thing that's in the way. And is this really what's happening, or is there a devil at work? Versus no, this is reality. This is what's happening here.
Right, it's not a giant mystery anymore.
Yeah.
It's just, and the things that are mysteries, I'm okay with being mysteries. It's not, I'm not supposed to know.
I love that.
It's not our, I don't feel like it's my responsibility to understand things that are higher things.
Right.
It's not, and I feel like it will only cause confusion and frustration to subscribe to something that I don't understand. The way I think most people I know who are Christians, and I'm really battling whether I want to share this or not, because once again, I don't want to convince people who are Christians to not be Christians. But the way I think most of them are in their faith today, who are, late 20s, early 30s, is they grew up in a church. They grew up with a teaching. Everyone had good enough answers for them not to doubt it. And even when they'd start to doubt it, there was nothing convenient about doubting it. There's nothing convenient about being in a high school group and having friends who you grew up with at church, having a family who preaches the Bible and takes great pride in how they brought you up in the Bible. there's nothing convenient that is apparent or that can be seen or grasped by saying, you know what, maybe I should try thinking differently. And maybe I should isolate myself and unwind all this and then see what I do or don't believe. And then what happens is you get through high school and you get to your early years in college, and maybe you struggle, with partying, the social scene or whatever. That's pretty common for most people who grew up Christian. But guess what? You always are on the lookout for a good Christian spouse, and then you two start to build a relationship that's Christ-centered, that becomes the center of your relationship, or it should be at least. You both believe that it should be. And then you get married, and now neither one of you are going to come out and say, maybe this is wrong. That's not convenient for either of you. You both signed up for this, under a Christ-centered thing. So if you start to have doubts, then it makes no sense. Mm-hmm. You have kids. How do you raise them? So what ends up happening, I think, for most people is they live this under this Christian banner. They have their doubts, but they can never take them too seriously because there's no convenience to doing so. There seems to be no value in doing so. You would worry. You would think that you just turn into a heat. I remember thinking, if I wasn't a Christian, I'd just do whatever I want. Well, that's not true.
Yeah.
At all.
No.
I've come to find out. And so then you have kids, and then it goes on until you're probably in your 40s and you're just kind of going through the motions. You're not really sure if you believe it or not, but it's never going to be convenient to come out and say that.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the path most people take, and quite possibly that's the happiest path they can take with whatever they put in stone already.
Sure.
So it's not my mission to ever talk anyone out of that, or out of their happiness, or out of what's convenient to them. However, I would say ideally, at some point in most people's lives, if they can manage it and get through it, which once again, I'm not sure everyone could.
Yeah.
It would be really interesting to see what you could find out about yourself by actually exploring those doubts and those challenges, and taking it to a different intellectual level to determine if, I'm not trying to crap on Christianity the way most people would. Like, how do you believe a book that's potentially 3,000 years old, or how can you believe an ark?
Yeah.
There's answers for all that. But I think where there wasn't an answer, and the thing that finally got me is, if there is faith, so if God's ultimate goal in creating us is that we would worship him and have a relationship with him, and we would glorify him, and he gave us 5 different ways of understanding the world, and we're to use those 5 ways to understand him, how can the answer to knowing him be completely deny the 5 ways he gave you to understand him?
The 5 senses, right? Is what you're getting at?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So if faith is the answer, it's not the way, at least I've understood faith as far as a biblical teaching. And it's also funny in the Bible, like when it talks about the people who had the most faith, most of them had an actual supernatural experience with God, whether it was a burning bush or a road to Damascus story. These are the people we consider to have the greatest faith. But at the same time, the Bible says they had the greatest faith. Abraham heard the voice of God,
Right.
It's like, no, that is the least amount of faith, to actually, hear God, see God.
Right.
I'm open to that happening. If Christ is, the Lord, please just speak to me in some way that we don't call Holy Spirit, which is the same exact thing as our conscience.
Right.
And there is no difference. It is just you talking to you can be as easily understood as a Holy Spirit.
There's no way to distinguish between Holy Spirit and conscience in a lot of ways. Yeah.
And you're arrogant if you're saying that you can. It's just arrogant. It's it's just funny the answers we had, or I was okay with, even though they weren't good answers. I was okay with them because I'm like, at least it's an answer, and I can't perfectly say that that's not true, or it's not explicitly not true, but when it comes to faith, and I'll try not to go too deep into it.
Oh, it's okay.
Faith is just not something that I can rationalize, in my mind with what the purpose of the ultimate goal God would have for his creation as the Bible proclaims it. And I just couldn't reconcile that. And then, a lot of the other answers that were good at the time become really not good answers at all. But when you're in it, and while it's convenient, you'll take any answer you can get that just is good enough.
Just keep it going
at the time.
Yeah. I actually really like kind of that thought, or that idea of, people going through life, and not only is it not convenient, but it will likely completely upend their life, completely take them off track. It could destroy their marriage. It could, in some cases, make them lose a job. So I think of in this sense, I kind of think of what you're saying. I'm kind of thinking about it in terms of like when someone has a crappy job they don't like, and there's bad things about it. They really can't think about it too much because they need that job. It stabilizes their life. Yeah,
or they think they need that job, and they would rather associate with the devil they know than think about the fact that it's a big, big world out there, and there's probably a ton of opportunities that they're just not even considering or opening a door to. But yes, you're absolutely right. I think as human beings, we get used to something, and it doesn't matter how much we complain about it, or it doesn't make sense, or we don't like it. It's just safer and easier and less work to
go along with it.
Yeah. To grow is the way I would put it. Each of those moments in life, I think, is an opportunity for growth, where you kind of come to a point where you realize you're not happy. Like, I think our happiness really is a compass. It's not something we should be ashamed of. Like, we should all be feeling a sense of security and a sense of being challenged. Otherwise, what are we doing? But yes, within life and within Christianity, I fully think your analogy is great. I think that it is really easy to just settle for whatever's in front of us when the opportunities are endless. Especially today, we have access to so much information. It's so much easier to be in two different places at once.
Yeah.
Kind of like we're doing now.
Yeah. Pretty much. Yeah.
It's, even the travel is so much simpler. I mean, the amount of tools and resources we have today, it's unfortunate that I think we mostly just use them to numb our brains instead of challenge them. Challenge
ourselves, grow, kind of like what you were saying.
Yeah, get comfortable being uncomfortable.
I like this idea that you said that happiness is a compass. I really like that because, not in the hedonistic sense, but
right.
In the deep, fulfilling sense is how I'm understanding it. Like, if something's wrong, if you're not feeling right about it, like Joseph Campbell always says, follow your bliss. Like that to me is a similar, like, if you know something's off, that job's not right, or if you know something's off and the doubts are really bothering you about your faith, like maybe this is that opportunity to grow. Maybe this is that opportunity that will get you on the right path for you.
Yeah, and I think that, in the same note, you got to have proper expectations for what your happiness should look like. And, that doesn't mean everything's great all the time. That would actually suck if that were the case, even though I think that's ideally what we think would be the best.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that everything's going perfect all the time. It's that you're just handling each situation as they come to the best of your ability and getting what you think would be best out of it, while also serving the others who are a part of it as the best way possible.
That's think huge.
I think that even 20% of your dream job should still probably give you fits. I think that's a proper expectation.
Yeah.
So and also not making knee-jerk reactions and not letting your feelings dictate any major decisions, which is tough, but you got to have that balance. And this is kind of interesting that we're even having this conversation now, because I think that's part of the issues I had with myself when I was a Christian. Is it was really hard for me to balance my emotions from my spirituality. You throw in this other element that has answers that are really artificial and not helpful in many circumstances. It's like the more I'm despairing, the more I'm being, I'm doing it for God, and it's just like, that's not true, man. You're just making excuses for, you're just trying to make yourself feel better in the worst kind of way.
Yeah.
At least for me, it's like, I am not a martyr. I've not lived a martyr's life. I've not gone a day on this earth, hungry, truly hungry. It's like the things that I would feel like a martyr for were just so ridiculous, and yet I would feel justified in being stuck in them, because it somehow, like, feeling bad was confirmation that I was exercising my faith correctly.
Yeah, suffering
in a
for
way
Christ.
that I don't understand. So I don't get it. I don't know why I have to go through this, but I just do.
So you just keep going through it instead of questioning it, growing from it, learning.
Yeah, well, and once again, it circles back to, like, I'm going to be in heaven again at some point anyways. So, whatever.
Yeah,
this is temporary.
Yeah.
The whole idea that this world is temporary and that there's something more permanent ahead that's going to be perfect really messed up the way, or really, I think about things a lot differently, not believing that. I'd rather believe that. And once again, this is just, I don't think this is necessarily any more true than anything else. But if I have to pick a perspective, I would rather choose to believe that I'm going to live this life over and over and over again. So I might as well make it the best life I can, because I'm going to be stuck with whatever this is what's going to be permanent. I think that's a healthier way of viewing things, and maybe what I was going through as a Christian.
Yeah.
But once again, I get it. I understand why people are Christian. I understand why most of my friends are. I just want them to be as happy and have meaningful lives. And if they're getting that, being Christians, I mean, I'm happy for them. But if they ever wanted to have the conversation of how difficult was it to deconstruct, and would you be there to support me one way or the other, that would be really cool.
Yeah.
But once again, I would not, I think as you know from your podcast, every story on deconverting is very different. And there's a lot out there and a lot waiting to probably come out there, but it's tough to find a platform to be able to do that. It's been probably 4 or 5 years now for me. And this is the first time I've ever talked to anyone about this in any sort of detail. So,
well, that's really cool. I appreciate you doing that with me.
I appreciate your platform for sure.
Yeah.
So,
well, I think something that I thought of when you were talking is that for everybody it's something different. Like, I'm hearing you talk about the things that were really huge for you, and another person, it's a totally different subject, or it's a totally different issue with Christianity that really gets them and really kind of pulls them away, or makes them feel like, this isn't for me anymore. And that, like you said, there's so many different types of stories, and that's what I find fascinating. For every kind of human being that goes through Christianity and then leaves Christianity, there's a different reason, in a sense. Everyone's unique, and we all have our own reasons, or even if it's the same reason, it's a little different. I don't know. It's kind of, it seems that way to me sometimes. I don't think that's exactly true all the time, but it does seem that we have very unique reasons, each of us do.
For sure. I think a lot of times just being a Christian becomes inconvenient, for people, where either they've gone through a breakup or had some sort of trauma, and obviously that's a great reason to not associate, with it anymore. Right. If that can be connected to any of that.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm curious, how many people might be out there who maybe it wasn't convenient. Even for me, I had my own sense of convenience in that I was, focused on my career and kind of more away from the regularity of those people who I cared a lot about who were in the church.
Mm-hmm.
But still pretty inconvenient. I would say the other thing too is, at the lowest, which I don't want to dive into too much, but at the lowest, I was able to at least have the sense to go see a therapist that, wasn't a Christian. Most of my therapy in my life was Christian based. It was normally really helpful, but going that route and getting connected with the right guy, that totally changed my life those 6 to 8 months and really helped me work through a lot of the struggles that I was going through. There's something extreme for those who have done any sort of therapy. I'm sure they know this, but or hopefully they've had a similar experience, but there's something different that you can talk about when it's someone who you have no relationship with, who is really just there to kind of help guide your thoughts as you're working through some depression or worse. So but I am curious, how much of it is convenience for us and how much of it is intellectual as to why we continue on a Christian journey versus why we don't anymore.
Yeah, I think that's hard because it's probably a different answer for each person.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
Agreed. You probably know better than I.
Yeah. So as far as thinking about yourself when you were your most Christian and most devoted, compared to the person you are today who is not a Christian, in some ways those are very different versions of yourself. When you look back at your life, there's something that's true about yourself, something positive that you can see, kind of a theme in your life that was there when you were at your most Christian and is still a part of who you are today. What would that be for you?
I think I've always been, or have put an active effort throughout my entire life, even from a young age, to be able to look in the mirror and just be honest with myself and not try to hide from scary things, I guess, maybe that are going on internally.
That's cool.
Ultimately is probably why I've eventually ended up where I am. And I think that has served me well. I think Christianity, when I was in high school and college, provided answers to difficult things that I was content with at the time, but always had a sense of, if any new information was brought to light, I'll deal with it as it comes. Myself very much included. It's so easy to be delusional and be living in your own worlds with your own perspective and spin on everything. And it's even worse when it's collectively a part of a community and thinking there's safety in numbers. So I think I always was okay being on my own with my thoughts, and that's probably one thing that's been consistent throughout my life, which shouldn't be shocking, looking back now that I'm even, talking to you today.
That's cool. Oh, I love that. Yeah, that's great. So for that person who's listening right now, because probably most people who listen to this podcast have just deconverted. So for that person who's being really honest with themselves, or they've been very honest with themselves and they've just kind of come through this, they're just on the other side of it, what kind of encouragement would you give them? What kind of guidance would you give them?
Try not to be bitter. Try to understand that not everyone's, is against you. That the people who are in the church who care about you and are worthwhile will still love you. That it's not a situation where you need to feel like you have all the answers for yourself right now. It's okay to do work on yourself and find your golf course, per se, or find your time where you can just be alone with your thoughts and rework some of the core of your purpose and what should matter most to you moving forward. that you're still fully capable of loving people as much without Christianity as you are with it, that there's valuable things that came from your Christian background that you'll come to appreciate later, that it's okay to go see a therapist, that there's other people who have been on a similar journey in their own way that would love to talk to you and encourage you. And ultimately, that being honest with yourself is probably going to be the most valuable thing you can do for yourself and others moving forward, and that there's freedom in being able to see life through a clearer lens that isn't convoluted by stuff you were felt cornered into believing, most of your life. I think that would be a good start.
Yeah, no, that's awesome.
But I'm sure there's a lot more I wish I had thought of.
Yeah, no, that was a very comprehensive answer, and it's a good answer. I thought it was great.
Okay, good.
Yeah, you gave a lot of really good points there, and one of them that I don't know if I've well, of course I'm going to forget now after 60 some episodes, but one that I don't think was emphasized maybe as much, or one that you did emphasize, I'll just say that, is not being bitter. And I think that's super important, because I think most people I've talked to at one point or another felt that for one reason or another. They might have felt bitter about one thing or a different thing, or bitter at a parent, or bitter at an experience, or whatever. That's a great thing to remember. I mean, that's just good advice, just in life in general, but in this process, this is good to keep in mind. I appreciate that you said that.
I think so. And that's not to, I don't want to belittle the people who still feel very bitter, and
sure.
And my story is different from theirs, but
they're bitter for a reason.
I agree with you in general in life. It's just best not to be bitter, and to find the good in, even right now, everything that went on through my Christian experience is redeemable in the rest of my life moving forward. Mm-hmm. I don't think there is a benefit to that upbringing that is unique to myself. I think in going back to not being bitter also, it's just a good rule of thumb in life. I would, for me at least, to always try to find the redeemable qualities out of memories, moments, people. And I think with that attitude and perspective, it starts to get a little more difficult to be bitter.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, is there any resource that you found that you felt like was really helpful to you?
A therapist?
No. Oh, okay, there you go. No, that's good. That's a good answer. I appreciate you saying that too, because I think that's great.
No, eventually. I mean, I didn't start down that path till probably a year and a half into it, and I think it was at the right time.
Yeah.
I would say if you maybe not someone else's song or whatever, but if you do have any sort of artistic side, I can remember writing a lot, and writing music or writing poetry or writing whatever, just anything you can do to get some stuff on a piece of paper, some stuff out in the air that you can kind of look at that's coming from you, I think is probably helpful, no matter how ugly it might look at the time. So
that's cool.
Once again, love to communicate with anyone surrounding this that could use some encouragement or help, or, I mean, shoot, even if you're a Christian, trying to, be a better Christian. I don't know if I'm the greatest resource, but I'd be happy to talk to you and maybe encourage you down that path as well.
That's cool. Yeah, I actually know of a Christian that listens that is still Christian, but has appreciated kind of the perspective of the different people who've told their stories. And, although they might choose a path that's different from yours or mine, they're open to the experience of other human beings. And to me, that's empathy, and that's probably one of the most important things that any of us could exercise in our life, is empathy for other people,
Absolutely. That's awesome. I mean,
yeah.
You're not the enemy. We're not the enemy.
Yeah.
We're all on the same team here.
We're all trying to figure this out. Yeah.
Yep. So, certainly I think that's really cool.
Well, that's awesome. And that's a very positive and a happy note to end on. Jordan, thank you so much for taking time to tell your story and share it with me, and for the first time really expressing it to someone out loud. That means a lot, and I appreciate you doing that.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Like I said, had no idea where this was going to go, but
yeah,
it's been great. Weird way, it feels like some weight lifted off my shoulders, which is good.
Thanks for listening to Voices of Deconversion. Be sure to join us next time by subscribing to the podcast.